But here we are at the Phoenix, musicians in bars, getting beer. John Catto. Tell me about the Diodes.
Okay. Well, the Diodes, we formed of an afternoon in 1976. I was going to OCA at that point, and one evening I walked into a room and picked up a guitar and strummed a few chords, and Paul Robinson, the singer, was actually in the room, and he chased down the street after me and went, whoa, 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 you know. I think he liked my clothes, if you want to know the truth, right? I had a pair of Bravo Creepers on, which like kind of no one had in '76, and I'd had them for a couple of years at that point. I bought them off of Malcolm McLaren in the sex shop, yeah. and sort of this stuff, and I think Paul had, in fact, been to one of my painting shows or something. I mean, all this is fucking hearsay, because I think everyone's changed the story many times over the years. But the bit that is true is that he went chasing down the street after me, had a chat, said, oh, let's do a band together. And within a couple of days, somehow this got turned into, someone came along and sort of went, oh, you know, we're getting this thing together, why don't you come along? Because he'd sort of done it coincidentally with sort of 4 different people, yeah? And so then we started and we rehearsed and we met a few people like Stephen Davey, who at that time was in the Dishes, and he kind of turned up and basically encouraged us a whole lot and came to every single rehearsal and went, here, I've got a song for you guys, you know? He did this over and over again. But anyway, coming up to January 77, we found out that the Talking Heads were coming to Toronto to play at A-Space. And my best friend when I was at OCA was I don't know what they call it then, but now we call it the Ents manager, right? You know? But he booked entertainment at OCA. So we called up the Talking Heads management, or probably we called up them, and said, hey, we heard you're coming down and you're playing this gallery. How would you like to play a paying gig? You know, how would you like to play a gig where we hand over actual money and you play in a big hall full of art students? And they were like, yeah, great, okay. And so what basically happened is we employed the Talking Heads to be the headliner so that we could play our first gig.
Great idea.
Yeah. And that was number one. And then this is the beginning of January, and then we did another thing at OCA, and then we did stuff. And at this point, there were other bands kind of circling around, you know? Like the Voltones existed, but they'd never played a gig, right? In fact, I don't even think they'd really barely rehearsed, but they had the jackets and stuff, right? And Teenage Head existed, but we didn't know that they existed. You know, they were off in Hamilton, you know? And so all these people kind of came down to these gigs, and then the Colonial started getting going, so that was there. We'd done kind of 3 OCA gigs, and we'd done a Colonial underground thing.
Oh, excellent.
And at this point, sort of Talking Head, by this point, sort of Teenage Head had played their first gig. The Voltones hadn't. They still hadn't played anywhere. This is like March something, yeah. And then what would happen is we got kicked out of rehearsing at OCA. This is the very long version of the story. Stop me if I do this.
No, that's okay. That's
we got kicked out of rehearsing at OCA, and we were approached by these people called SEAC, who were kind of these radical bomb-wielding anarchist art conglomeration. They'd probably laugh if they heard that, but you know. But in any case, they approached us to do some performing arts thing, right? Which is what eventually came out as Raw War, like a year later, maybe a bit less than that. It was 6 months later. But anyway, they approached us about doing this performance arts thing, and we went, great, we'll do it, but can we use your basement to rehearse in? So into their basement we went. They went, oh yeah, fine, we're off to Europe with this and that, you know. And we went into the basement, and we were in there about a day, and John Hamilton, our drummer, kind of looked, and he went, this place would make a really great speakeasy. And well, it never had to be a speakeasy because they had a liquor license, but then that's how the Crash and Burn came about. Okay. We basically put a stage in there, did the thing, and that takes us all the way up to right about literally the last day that the Crash and Burn ran when we had the Dead Boys down from New York, in the week after, we ran into CBS, literally. I mean, someone was out, they were walking around, the CBS A&R person, and they said, "Oh, we've been hearing about you, we're looking." And we had a record deal within, I think if it was a month, that's an exaggeration.
Right.
We'd already booked time in a studio to go in there and record a single kind of independently. We used that booked time just because they didn't have anything handy that like at Manta or whatever, which they use normally. They used that time to do the first demo. We had a demo that we did. We had a demo that we'd done in the basement of Crash and Burn that we handed to them, that we did with Dave Stone, who went on to play with, in fact, I think Dave Stone was playing with Rainbow at that point as a keyboard player. And it was sort of like Dave Stone and Bob Segarini or something kind of throwing mics around in this thing, literally in the Crash and Burn space with the PA that hadn't been collected or packed up and sent back yet. And we did a demo, handed that to CBS. And anyway, literally, then we did another demo with them on that time we had booked, and then we were signed to CBS. That was literally that fast. I mean, nothing ever happens that fast anymore, right? But that was how we started. That's the capsule version, leaving out the riot. Leaving out the riot. Because along the way, in the middle of the Crash and Burn, we played in the Crash and Burn, and what happened is Long John Baldry was playing upstairs, and he basically was about to launch into the acoustic set, and he sent the bouncers of the club down to turn us down.
Oh, really?
And being us, we kind of went piss off, like, really,
I think there's another movie about that.
Yeah.
Quadrophenia.
And normally that would just go backwards and forwards in a regular sort of escalating conversation. In this particular case, they came back with baseball bats and pool cues. And instead of attacking the instead of attacking the band, they attacked the audience. Like this completely insane, out of control thing happened. And then all the guys who were like from Detroit or something anyway got shipped out of the country the next day, and eventually had to be extradited because there were people like, I think Paul, who was the manager of Teenage Head, was there, and he got hit pretty nasty and got put into a coma.
Oh my gosh.
And all these things happened, and so some of these things exceeded the ability of the club to hide these people away. But all that got forgotten by sort of, I think, about March the next year, because we played upstairs there then. But the Colonial, that's an old story, I went there when I was 13, 14. I saw Howling Wolf at the Colonial. I saw Elvin Jones, all these people. Could you do that now? Could you be like 13 or 14 and go and see legends, And you could then, I kind of worked out, I literally worked out that you could turn up there and you could be 13 or 14 or something, like really a little kid, and go upstairs at the matinee and buy a burger and sit there quietly and watch the Pimps and watch Howling Wolf.
Wow.
Which is like an amazing thing, and that's like like the last moments of sort of Toronto being part of the Chitlin circuit and all of that, right? So that was when I was a teenager. But then I'd been to see, like if you look at every single person who was in the punk scene in '77, they're all people who were in the glam scene. So if you looked at every single person who was at Iggy and the Stooges on Spadina, the Victory Burlesque Theatre, or who was at the New York Dolls at the Victory Burlesque, or Silverhead, or who went to see T-Rex at Massey Hall, or all of these people. So we're talking about all the guys. So like I was at all those shows. All those guys from Teenage Head were at those shows. Stephen Leckie was at those shows. All of the girls, so all the Nicastas and Xenias and Cynthia Rosses and the Anya Vardas and all of the girls who hung around that scene, they were all at those shows. And So basically, all the people who were kind of 15 years old and going to glam rock shows, like 3 years later got bored, and then they decided that they were going to be this new thing, right? Which you saw coming just like, you know, we kind of saw it coming before we even had a name for it, really, right? And that's a universal link, you know. Like I live in London, England now, and you know, lots and lots of my best friends are people who played in the English punk scene. You know, like James Stevenson, who was in Chelsea and now plays with The Alarm, and in fact is doing the tours with Tony Visconti, doing the Bowie material. Well, anyway, all those people were exactly the same, right? They're all people who were just like insane glam fans, like on a huge level, who saw all the glam bands and did the thing, and you know, either hung around at it. I photographed all of those bands. That's what I was doing then, you know, and buying the clothes, you know, and so it all kind of coalesced. You know, like it's a universal thing, though. You know, like if you look at all the Americans, they were glam fans. If you look at all of the English people, they were also all glam rock fans. And the glam rock thing, by virtue of all the young end of the glam scene, all of them moved on, and the next thing was they moved into what then became the punk scene. But we didn't think of it that way. I mean, we thought of it as a sort of alternative garagey, you know. Well, we did use the name actually. But it didn't because it meant it had a lot more to do with what you weren't than what you were, right? So you go, no, I'm not an REO Speedwagon fan. No, I don't like Supertramp. You know? But it wasn't this incredibly sort of cartoon, formalized thing now. You know, there were no people sort of dressing up in tartan, and you know, and to be honest, if someone had been to England, they might have a pair of bondage trousers, but they were more likely. Most people kind of wore Beatle boots or whatever, you know, like, and it was almost more like a kind of 60s mod kind of thing with motorcycle jackets tossed on top and hacky hair, you know.
It was English.
Yeah.
Did you get more credibility in England? Like, was Toronto not happening enough?
New York is intimately meshed with Toronto.
I see.
England existed as a sort of island, other than knowing that the Ramones were coming over and obviously the Heartbreakers and that kind of thing, right? But New York, all the New York bands were coming to Toronto. You know, if you read things like Cheetah Chrome from the Dead Boys book, you know, they talk about how Toronto's like his favorite city that he's ever played, and all of these things, and all those New York bands were coming to Toronto, and so, you know, like there was the Dead Boys coming to Toronto, the Ramones coming to Toronto, Wayne County coming to Toronto, also the big shows, right? You know, the Patti Smiths and stuff, who was already quite big then, and Blondie, and alternatively, we were going and playing in CBGBs and then at Max's, especially after we got the record deal. But we played at CBGBs before we got the record deal, but we played pretty much exclusively Max's Kansas City after that. But there's definitely a link there, you know, because, you know, like we were sort of there, and there was like all the New York people that we were hanging around with, like Lydia Lunch and that, all the people from the Fast. I've known Sylvain from the New York Dolls since before all of this, but not since 74, but since 75-ish, when they did the New Dolls thing after they did Japan and they'd broken up and they came back together. So all of those people, there's this huge crossover between Toronto and New York. And it's almost exclusively between those two, you know, just in the same way that, you know, bands were sort of descending upon New York from Philadelphia, like, you know, like the Dead Boys were coming from Minneapolis or Philadelphia, I can't remember exactly, but they went for New York. And there were all the New York bands, and everyone was kind of traveling into New York, and then in turn all those bands were coming to Toronto, and all the Toronto bands were going to New York and playing that. And we also did things like playing at the Rat in Boston and all of those things. And so there's a huge interchange there. Yeah. The interchange with Canada and England is actually minimal. We had I think Sound's single of the week or something at a certain point and that kind of thing. But and our stuff was released because we were with a major label, so we had that, and we had a lot of things. At one point, with America, at one point we had the #2 import album after the Clash's first album, which of course Sony had, or CBS had refused to release. Just like they refused to release ours. Wow. You know, so we were going in there. So as a result, I'm constantly running into people from like Texas. You know, you run into people from Texas and they go, everyone in my high school had your album. We went and we were playing at the Whiskey A Go Go. This is like 1980, and we played at the Whiskey A Go Go, and we kind of walked. We were staying at the Tropicana, which you probably know about, like sort of legendary LA shitty motel. And we were at the Tropicana. We'll walk up the street to the Starwood, and we walk into the Starwood. We go, we're playing down the street at the Whiskey. Can we get in? And they went, who are you with? And we were the Diodes. And the next thing, I'm kind of hustled into the VIP lounge, taken upstairs to the office, and there's like huge Diodes posters everywhere, because we'd had several kind of aborted attempts to get us out to the West Coast. And if we were supposed to tour with the Dead Boys, and then Johnny got knifed. We were supposed to go out there with Tough Darts when Robert Gordon was still with the band. All of these things, and they all fell through for one thing or another. So we didn't actually get there to 1980. But it was amazing to discover that everyone out there had the record. So there's a sort of whole thing, and we'd always done well in Boston and that kind of thing. So it's pretty wide ranging. Yeah. And of course, like in 2010, we went and played in Rome, Italy, and Venice. And of course our albums had been released over there, and so it was like your entire Italian record collecting contingent comes out to that kind of thing.
Sure.
It's an incredibly different world, you see. It's like no one now in a kind of pre-1985, or rather a post-1985 Canadian world, no one now can really perceive of what it was like before. Right. I mean, I don't know. I don't know when you started sort of paying attention to all this, but if you were around back then, you'll remember like it was like Yay, and it was like all kind of Canadian pub cover bands and this and sort of thing, and then it kind of changed radically. It changed radically when we sort of started with the punk thing, and and there was a huge breakthrough like about 1980, late 79, where all of a sudden the whole mood changed, and then you could kind of tour across the country, because you couldn't before. We went over to the UK, me and the singer Paul. We headed over to the UK in sort of 1980, late 81. And we were there briefly, then came back to Canada and did that for a bit. And then everyone headed over. And we had a band that we did in England for a few years called High Noon. After that, everything kind of falls apart, and it all kind of, the dots join again in 98. Actually, really officially, they joined again in about 95, because we started dealing with Sony to reissue the CBS product on a CD. And that culminated with doing the Mike Bullard show in 98. And the thing that's funny is, of course, we came over, we put the thing together, and we played the thing, and we went on TV. This is probably what you saw, actually. It's probably Mike Bullard show. And we came over and did that Saturday night, and it was Saturday Night Live. Yeah, right. But Saturday live in Toronto from the Masonic Temple.
Still a historic spot.
And we did the Bullard show, and the thing that's really funny is we all kind of sort of did it and had a big party afterwards, and then I got on the plane back to England. We didn't think about it for I suppose about sort of 6 years. Yeah. Wow. And then we were coming up to the 30th anniversary. We'd all been talking to Liz Worth about writing Treat Me Like Dirt. Yeah, so Liz had been like calling me up long distance and sort of going over all of the history of Canadian punk. And I'm going, it's the 30th anniversary and we should play. Yeah. So we kind of did the thing. In the end, we did North by Northeast over there. Yeah, and we also did Sneaky D's, and it was like a huge success, and it was really cool. And we thought, oh, we'll get going immediately, and then we still didn't do it again until 2010. But you know, it's fits and starts because the biggest deal was half the band live in England, right? At this point, 3/4 of the band, really, you know, because we've got now John playing drums. Right. Who was in a band, or he's probably told you already.
Kingmaker,
but
yeah,
he was in Kingmaker.
Interview.
John, with that coming together now, we're sort of aiming to sort of do a lot more stuff, record new material, just because we can. Now, you know, it's the technology has changed, and a lot of things about the whole thing, the way you can handle records. If you don't know already, we've got, coming up next year, we've got vinyl reissues of all 3 albums.
Awesome.
Yeah, which are all going to be done as a box sort of curated set with all the outtakes and everything. We've got the Italian Time Damage Live at the El Macombo album, which came out in 2010, is now available as a digital download for the full show.
Where do we get that? On your website, iTunes links?
iTunes.
Like that? Yeah.
iTunes. It's on iTunes. Great. Now. There will be physical media soon.
Wow.
We were trying to get it together for this micro tour, but that will be available. The physical media for that will be available soon. We actually have quite a lot of stuff that's sort of sitting, I guess you could say, on the table, ready to go.
Any thoughts about a full-fledged Riot Fest, like Teenage Head, you guys, and Vile Tones?
You see, wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
I think it'd be great.
Wow, 3 bands, nice summer day.
I always thought, I've been talking to people for years about going, why don't we do sort of like superheroes of Canadian punk, multi-tour, everyone on stage at one time. Well, the nearest we've gotten to it actually is these shows, you know, with me and Gord getting together. You know, none of us have ever done this before. Yeah. You know, I was trying to remember whether we ever jammed on stage like at the Crash and Burn or something like that. Mm-hmm. But we've been doing because we've been doing the shows with Gord. We've been doing stuff with me and Gord together, and you know, it's monster. You know, we did it. We did it last night at the St. Hollywood. Yeah. And we did it here at the Phoenix.
That was Gordy's hometown.
Yeah, and Gordy came out, and you know, I didn't even know it at the time, but you know, everyone pointed out in photos. They're going, "Oh, look, there's Daniel Lenoir standing there going."
Yeah.
And it was, oh man, it was like, but it was great. You know, it really was great because it was just like a 747. I mean, both of us are sort of have hideous reputations for playing too loud, right? So the both of us on one stage, it really is like standing underneath a 747 taking off.
Wow.
So it was too much fun.
Daniel, if you're watching, I need an interview. You can't just sit around in a Diodes show and not give me an interview now.
So I wish I'd got a chance to talk to him actually, because I didn't know he was there.
Oh, okay.
You get told about this afterwards, of course, right? Always.
Well, I'll send him this link and tell him you're interested in having
what else can I tell you about miscellaneous gap filling stuff?
Oh, crazy! I always ask people for the craziest story that's happened out in the audience or behind the scenes, or.
I'll tell you what I'll tell you about. We played the Hong Kong Cafe in LA, and we were on a bill at the Hong Kong Cafe with Agent Orange and the Circle Jerks. This is right at the sort of dawn of the sort of surf punk come hardcore revival. Oh. And it was just like a really funny thing, you know, like, you know, you have these kind of weird evenings and it's like, I mean, we were like kind of 3 songs in and I'd kick someone in the head for trying to steal the beer off of my amp. but the crowning creation of this was this big, like 6'5" guy got up on stage and started tussling with us singer Paul. And he did this for a bit and it became obvious that it wasn't, his idea of playful wasn't exactly my idea of playful. So I took my guitar off and I hit him. And at this point, Ian, our bass player, is just completely, he's like, you can't do that. And Ian's trying to pull me away, and just for like a half a second, the guy had hold of the guitar, and that's really one of those things, it just can't happen. So I got the thing back, and I just started hitting him and hitting him and hitting him. And at this point, like, our sound man's like up behind the guy, holding him, and two of the bouncers, and they're holding the guy, and I'm still like piling into him with a Strat. So then, you know, like, and it's like crunch, 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 and the guy keeps on going, and he keeps on going. Finally, the bouncers take him, and they toss him down the stairs. And he crawls up the stairs, gets to the top of the stairs, and he reaches over the PA and starts pulling all the lids out, right? So the bouncers throw him down the stairs again. You know, bam, down the stairs. And then he crawls up again, and then they did it again, and the third time he went through the plate glass door, whoa, and the crowd went wild, right? And poured out of the club, streamed down the street, destroying all the windows in Chinatown. It made the wire services, everything. We've got this poor girl from like CBS LA who's like hiding in the back room with us, right? Going, what on earth is going on? But that's a fairly good one.
I think that's the best one that's ever been on my show. That's crazy. John,
I could tell you about being introduced. I was introduced to Kim Fowley by this woman who was the door person at the Starwood, and he was emerging from what was basically a place that could only exist in 1980 LA, which is an underage discotheque called Odyssey, where aging rock stars went to hang around with 13-year-old girls. So she took us there. It's apparently part of the official sightseeing tour, right, in LA in 1980. But anyway, the first boy, she goes, "Oh, you have to meet Kim," right? And there's this guy, he's tall, right? And he looks like Frankenstein. And so that's when I met. That's when I met Kim Fowley, coming out of an underage disco in LA.
Oh, that's great. A couple of good ones there. Let's take a little break. We'll be right back. What?
Okay. Well, one of the things I noticed, and this started this was already evident in 2007, which is before Liz Worth actually had her book out. But what started happening when we did North by Northeast and so on, I'd look out into the audience, and there's loads and loads and loads of young punk kids. And they've all kind of independently discovered all this stuff, just like Liz did prior to putting her book together, because she came and started talking to people because she discovered that there was this Toronto punk scene, which to a degree, even though it's the absolute foundations of the Canadian independent music industry, a lot of it has been kind of forgotten, you know? The big breakthrough for all of those bands came in the middle 80s, you know, when all this sort of Cowboy Junkies and the Blue Rodeos and all of those all of a sudden could break North America wide. Right. And it didn't happen before then, but all the groundwork, and many of those people, of course, had been in bands, and the Blue Rodeo obviously had been in a band called the Hi-Fis, which was played around this sort of immediately post-punk period. And but I think the whole thing is, and especially since the book, is that all those people kind of read this, and I mean, obviously these kids are already self-identifying as punks, yeah, but they're discovering that they've got this piece of Canadian heritage which is theirs. It's not borrowed American heritage, it's not borrowed British heritage, it's contemporary with the original period, and it's uniquely Canadian, yeah, you know, all of those bands there, and they realized that it was absolutely on the same zero ground level, you know, like we started in 76, so it's plenty early in the whole scene, you know, not as early as, I don't know, the Ramones playing in 75 or something, but you know, 74, right. but then they weren't like they were later then anyway, you know. So that's one of the big breakthroughs is sort of the realization that there's sort of like a Canadian scene, that it's part of this sort of Canadian culture, it's part of the makeup of the whole thing. And then of course they find that there's records, and there's, you know, everyone's documented, everyone's this, and of course it's, after the book came out, of course, now of course, you know, everyone has come out of the woodwork. Everyone who's alive, which is most of them, you know. There's a few people like Mike from The Ugly and that who are no longer with us. But in general, most of the original players are still here. So it's pretty much intact, you know. You can find almost all of the people.
Definitely. We need the Canadian Riot Fest.
Yeah. No, I think it's an absolutely super idea.
Sounds great.
So if anyone's listening,
It's
it's an absolutely killer idea. It is.
All right. John Catto, thanks for being on Musicians in Bars Getting Beer.
Thank you.
Outside the Phoenix.
Yes. But where's the beer? In there.
Let's go get some.
Yeah.